Good afternoon, dear students. I welcome you to online counseling class of BA 6th semester on the course English Fiction being organized by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. I am your counselor, Dr. S.M. Fasiullah. In today's class, we are going to discuss Mrs. Dalloway, a novel written by Virginia Woolf. Before we take up this topic, let us quickly recall and understand the context in which we are going to read or discuss this novel, Mrs. Dalloway. In the previous class, we began our discussion on 20th century English novel. And you may recall that we discussed modernism as a literary movement and various features of modernism, as well as different thematic concerns in a modernist novel. So let me quickly take you through that so that it remains fresh in the memory when we discuss Mrs. Dalloway as a modernist text in today's discussion. The modernist movement emerged at the end of 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century as a response to multiple social, political, scientific changes of that time. There were a lot of new scientific discoveries which changed people's point of views towards the world itself. Psychology, as a newly emerged field, developed further with Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic approach. It opened a whole new understanding towards the human mind. Also, with Einstein's theory of relativity, people faced a sudden change of the familiar conception of the physical world. And this perspective transformed the previous perception of space and time into more subjective manner. Especially after the Industrial Revolution and the First World War, people were getting more alienated and feel more disillusioned from the world around them. This situation leads to the collapsing of previously acquired metaphysical and ethical assumptions and makes people to lose their sense of certainty, trust, and security. In this kind of atmosphere, where most people were starting to search different kind of perceptions to explain the world, lots of different artistic movements and new ways of expressions were emerged. In this context, in these changing circumstances, modernism emerged as a new perspective, not just in literature, but art and other areas. Literary modernism can be considered as one of those art forms It is separated from classic traditional forms of writings in terms of the character, structure, language use, narration, and plot, which used by realistic writer or realist writers such as Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, and George Eliot of the Victorian era. In this sense, breaking with the tradition is one of the important aspects of literary modernism. Moreover, as a newly emerged form of narration, modernist writers use stream of consciousness, a new technique for getting directly into the character's minds. Unlike the realist writers' technique of telling, the modernist writers prefer showing the character's emotions, thoughts, and experiences. Now, Mrs. Dalloway, written in 1925 by Virginia Woolf, has various elements to be considered as being a part of the modernist literary movement and has a great influential role upon other modernist novels, with including new techniques such as fragmentation of time, multiple narratives, and stream of consciousness. So, students, if you recall, we talked about five important key characteristics of modernist novel in our previous discussion. If you missed that, I urge you to check our previous counseling session on Introduction to 20th Century English Novel, where we talked about modernism and its features. Well, with this, I think let us begin our actual discussion on Mrs. Dalloway with a precise plot summary. Let's start. Clarissa Dalloway, an upper class 52-year-old woman married to a politician, decides to buy flowers herself for the party she is hosting that evening instead of sending a servant to buy them. London is bustling and full of noise this Wednesday, almost 5 years after Armistice Day. Big Ben strikes. The king and queen are at the palace. It is a fresh mid-June morning, and Clarissa recalls one girlhood summer on her father's estate, Gorton. She sees herself at 18, standing at the window, feeling as if something awful might happen. Despite the dangers and despite having only a few tweaks of knowledge passed on to her by her childhood governess, Clarissa loves life. Her one gift, she feels, is an ability to know people by instinct. Clarissa next runs into her old friend Hugh Whitbread. Hugh and Clarissa exchange a few words about Hugh's wife, Evelyn, who suffers from an unspecified internal ailment. Beside the proper and admirable Hugh, Clarissa feels self conscious about her hat. Past and present continue to intermingle as she walks to the flower shop. She remembers how her old friend Peter Walsh disapproved of Hugh. She thinks affectionately of Peter, who once asked her to marry him. She refused. He made her cry when he said she would marry a prime minister and throw parties. Clarissa continues to feel the sting of these criticisms, but now also feels anger that Peter did not accomplish any of his dreams. She continues to walk and considers the idea of death. She believes she will survive in the perpetual motion of the modern London streets, in the lives of her friends and even strangers, in the trees in her home. She reads lines about death from a book in a shop window. Clarissa reflects that she doesn't do things for themselves, but in order to affect other people's opinions of her. She imagines having her life to live over again. She regrets her face, baked with a bird's and her thin body. She stops to look at a Dutch picture and feels invisible. She's conscious that the world sees her as her husband's wife, as Mrs. Richard Dalloway. Clarissa looks in the window of a glove shop and contemplates her daughter, Elizabeth, who cares little for fashion and prefers to spend time with her dog and her history teacher, Miss Kilman, with whom she reads prayer books and attends communion. Clarissa wonders if Elizabeth is falling in love with Miss Kilman, but Richard believes it is just a phase. Clarissa thinks of her hatred for Miss Kilman, which she is aware is irrational as a monster. A car backfires with Clarissa is in the flower shop, and she and several others turns to observe the illustrious person passing in a grand car. They wonder if it is the Queen or the Prime Minister behind the blinds. The car inspires feelings of patriotism in many onlookers. Septimus Warren Smith, a veteran of World War I, who's about 30 years old, also hears the car backfire. He suffers from shell shock, a mental illness brought on by the horrors of war, and believes he is responsible for the traffic congestion the passing car causes. Lucrezia, or Rezia, his young Italian wife, is embarrassed by his odd manner and also frightened since Septimus recently threatened to kill himself. She leads him to Regent's Park, where they sit together. Septimus' thoughts are incomprehensible to his wife. He believes he is connected to trees and that trees must not be cut down. He believes that if he looks beyond the park railing, he will see his dead friend Evans and fears the world might burst into flames. Septimus, Razia, and many minor characters observe a plane overhead writing letters in the sky. The letters eventually seem to read Toffee. Septimus believes someone is trying to communicate with him in a coded language. Razia cannot stand to see him so broken, starting and talking out loud, and she walks to the fountain. She sees a statue of an Indian holding a cross. She feels alone and for a moment is angry with Septimus. After all, Dr. Holmes has said that Septimus has nothing at all the matter with him. Suddenly, Razia feels her devotion to her husband clearly and returns to where he sits. A young woman, Maisie Johnson, asks them directions. And as she walks away, she thinks about how strange the couple is. An older woman, Carrie Dempster, observes Messi and feels regret about her own life. So, student, we had a brief plot summary of the text Mrs. Dalloway. A few points I would like to mention here before we go into the life of Virginia Woolf as a writer. Now, this novel takes place in post First World War London and tells the story about one day from Clarissa Dalloway's life. As we summarized the story begins with Mrs. Dalloway leaving her house to walk around London streets to get flowers for her evening party. After her old lover Peter Walsh visited her, she starts to question the events from her past and her current situation in life. On the other hand, an old First World War soldier named Septimus simultaneously struggles to heal from the traumas of war and frequently remembers his friend's death. The narration shows Peter Walsh, Septimus, and Clarissa's thoughts that are traveling around time. Throughout the novel, the narration doesn't follow a straight structure. Instead, it travels between past and present time through the thoughts of characters. Also, when Clarissa and Peter having a conversation in Clarissa's house, she thinks about what would have happened if she had not refused to marry Peter. With the thoughts of Clarissa, narration jumps to an alternative timeline where she and Peter are happy together. In addition to fragmentation of time as a modernist feature, multiple perspectives play an important role in the novel. We will take up different features of Dalloway as a modernist novel in a short while. But before that, I think it is important to know about Virginia Woolf. Adeline Virginia Stephen was born in 1882 to Leslie Stephen and his second wife, Julia. Her father was a distinguished intellectual, an author, literary critic, and philosopher. He was the original editor of Dictionary of National Biography and a pioneering mountaineer. Julia had been a model for photographers and pre-Raphaelite artists and had worked as a nurse. Virginia had three siblings, Vanessa, Toby, and Adrian, and four half siblings. The family lived at 22 Hyde Park Gate, Kensington, where the young girls received home tuition. From 1897 to 1902, Virginia took classes in Greek, Latin, history, and German in the King's College Department for Ladies, London. She loved to write from an early age, contributing to the family newspaper, the Hyde Park Gate News. Tragedy struck when her mother passed away in 1895. Virginia experienced her first major period of mental illness and was to suffer from mania and severe depression for the rest of her life. There was further trauma just 2 years later when her half sister Stella died. Her father followed in 1904. Then her beloved Thoby was taken from her by typhoid fever in 1906. In addition to these devastating losses, Virginia claimed that she was sexually abused during her childhood by her half brothers, George and Gerard, particularly the former. After Sir Leslie Stephen's death, Virginia, Vanessa, Phoebe, and Adrian moved to 46 Gordon Square, Bloomsbury. Here, Phoebe organized Thursday evening meetings for the discussion of intellectual and cultural matters. This coterie became the Bloomsbury Group. Virginia married one of the members, Leonard Woolf, in 1912. Despite informing him that she did not find him physically attractive, Leonard proved to be an attentive husband, eager to nurture her talents and to create a calm environment that would be conducive to her writing. Her first novel was The Voyage Out in 1915. Subsequently, the Woolfs set up the Hogarth Press in Richmond in 1917. This enabled them to print their own efforts and to commission texts that tended to be rejected by more commercially minded publishers. For example, they published Catherine, Catherine Mansfield and T.S. Eliot. Virginia's other novels were Night and Day, published in 1919, Jacob's Room, published in 1922, Mrs. Dalloway, published in 1925, To the Lighthouse, published in 1927, Orlando, published in 1928, The Waves, published in 1931, The Years, published in 1937, and Between the Acts, published in 1941. In fact, Woolf was an innovative writer. Throughout her career, she experimented with the theme and form, producing thoughtful essays about the nature of prose fiction and the challenges it posed. Her critical works include Modern Fiction, her famous plea in A Rooms of One's Own, published in 1925, for women to have independence and privacy to write, and Three Guineas, published in 1938, which was broadly on the theme of women's place in the world and their opportunities for education. There were five major bouts of debilitating physical illness and nervous breakdowns, and Woolf repeatedly attempted suicide. Eventually, she killed herself in 1941, leaving notes in which she expressed her feelings of guilt about spoiling Leonard's life. Well, after this brief introduction of Mrs. Virginia Woolf, Miss Virginia Woolf, the writer of Mrs. Dalloway, let's go back to the novel Mrs. Dalloway. So now what we will do is we will okay, a few more important points about Virginia Woolf as a novel. We had a comprehensive overview of Virginia Woolf, her life, her education, her you know, marriage, and other important things. From what we have learned about Virginia Woolf, we can easily say that she was a different type of novelist. She wanted to capture in words the nature of human consciousness, what it actually feels like to be alive. She wasn't particularly interested in telling a story. And this, of course, is one of the things which makes Mrs. Dalloway seem very different from other novels we might have read. One can hardly find it so interesting as to hurry through the pages. There is no urgency on your part to know what happens next. In most of the other novels, the reader must have found that the novelist, in a way, stands alongside his or her invented characters, comments on their actions, their appearance, their personal histories. But Virginia Woolf reveals her characters through what they themselves think and say, and through the different, often contradictory impressions which other people have of them. This lack of fixed, all knowing viewpoint is something else which makes Mrs. Dalloway challenging to read. We have already stated the fact that Virginia Woolf wasn't satisfied with the fiction of her time, but what exactly she wanted to put in its place. If sort of fiction she herself wanted to write, what sort of fiction she herself wanted to write? What, in other words, was the cause of her dissatisfaction with her uh, predecessors, writers, and novelists? The answer to these questions are provided to a large extent by her articles, diaries, and letters. It is important that we do not see her as an isolated individual, but as someone who had very close links with other artists and intellectuals of her time. Through looking at the text of the novel itself, at Woolf's attempt to represent the workings of the mind, we shall see how, in practice, she carried out the representation of what was to her the most fragile, dangerous, and exciting processes, life itself. I think it is also of importance to put this text into context. When she looked around herself in the 1920s, Virginia Woolf was disappointed by the limitations she found in many contemporary novelists. For example, in writers like H.G. Wells, John Galsworthy, and Arnold Bennett. She complained that they wrote far too much about things and not enough about people. Or if they described people, they were far more interested in what they looked like, what kind of house they lived in, what furniture they put in it, than in their thoughts and feelings. A chief accusation against novelists such as Bennett was that they spend immense skill and immense industry making the trivial and the transitory appear the true and the enduring. If you look at her non-fictional writings, they can help us to understand not just what she was hoping to achieve in specific novels, but also to see the way in which she was experimenting with the traditional novel form. From 1920 onwards, she was explicitly thinking of a new type of fiction, one based upon the novelist's own feelings and not upon convention. It was to have no plot, no comedy, no tragedy, no love interest or catastrophe in the accepted style. These elements are not easily discernible in Mrs. Dalloway. Take, for example, the death of Septimus, which is undoubtedly a tragic event in the novel. In a conventional novel, the novelist would have spent a few pages and developed it into a moving scene. But here, Septimus' death is casually reported in the party. It's a different matter that the news deeply affects Mrs. Dalloway's consciousness. The love interest in the accepted style is also missing. We're only reported what happened in the past. One wonders if this reporting can be as effective as the usual description in a conventional novel. In fact, Virginia Woolf wanted to write with an entirely different approach. No scaffolding, scarcely a brick to be seen. Her later novels show her experimentations with new techniques at work. In Jacob's Room, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and a few others, the novelist stresses the importance of understanding her characters from within. These novels represent a working out in practice of the theories which she put forward into two important essays, Modern Fiction and Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Brown. Now let's again go back to Mrs. Dalloway, the novel. It's now time to come straight to the novel, consider its story in brief, and then discuss some of the important aspects. We have, we have had an outline of the plot, background of the novel, and some introduction of Mrs. Dalloway. So let us move on to explore some important aspects in the novel Mrs. Dalloway. We will start with an important characteristic of modernist novel, that is the use of stream of consciousness. Now one wonders what is a stream of consciousness, right? Stream of consciousness is basically a technique, or to be very precise, a narrative technique used by Virginia Woolf in her novel. Now, we will start with the very definition of what stream of consciousness is. The term stream of consciousness was coined by psychologist and philosopher William James in his work, The Principles of Psychology, published in 1890. Consciousness doesn't appear to itself as chopped up in bits. It is nothing joined. It flows. A river or a stream are the metaphors by which it is most naturally described. In talking of it hereafter, let us call it the stream of thought, consciousness, or subjective life. So it means the continuous flow of sense perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and memories in human mind, or a literary method of representing such a blending of mental processes in fictional characters, usually in an unpunctuated or disjointed form of interior monologue. The term is often used as a synonym for interior monologue, but they can also be distinguished in two ways. In the first sense, the stream of consciousness is the subject matter, while interior monologue is the technique for representing it or presenting it. In the second sense, stream of consciousness is a special style of interior monologue. While an interior monologue always presents a character's thoughts directly without the apparent intervention of a summarizing and selecting narrator. It doesn't necessarily mingle them with impressions and perceptions, nor does it necessarily violate the norms of grammar, syntax, and logic. But the stream of consciousness technique also does one or both of these things. It is an important device of modernist fiction and its later imitators. This technique was pioneered by Dorothy Richardson in Pilgrimage and further developed by Virginia Woolf in Mrs. Dalloway. Now, let us be clear about one thing. The whole novel hinges or depends on a particular type of technique. We have referred to it already as stream of consciousness. And during the course of our discussion of this novel, we will have occasion to comment on this technique again and again so that you may be able to comprehend fully the various aspects of the novel. All the characters, as we have seen, walk through important places of London. They walk and they think. Nothing of note or important happens. There may be a tire burst in the market, or overhead an aeroplane may fly, making repeated passes over a certain area, or an ambulance may rush through, carrying the injured to the hospital. All these seemingly trivial happenings stir memories, associations, and feelings in the minds of the different characters, so that the inner and the outer aspects of experience are interwoven. For example, walking to Bloomsbury for dinner, Peter hears the bell of the ambulance that has picked Septimus up. The sight and sound trigger his mental processes. He marvels at the triumphs of civilization and the efficiency, the organization, the communal spirit of London. Soon, his thoughts turned to Clarissa, with whom he had explored London, sitting on top of an omnibus. His stream of consciousness continues, and we learn about other meetings between the two. It is in this way that a character's mind works, and in the process provides us with the necessary information about him and other characters. Let us take another instance, again with Peter. While on his way to his lawyer, Peter comes across Septimus and Razia. He thinks they are having a serious quarrel and wonders why. Later, the beauty of the scene captures his attention, and then he thinks of Manchester. But why Manchester? He wonders. Then he remembers that it was Sally Seton who married a rich man settled there. It is in this way that the stream of consciousness flows by a natural, easy transition. His mind goes to Burton, Clarissa, and then to her friends. Impressions and memories are linked up emotionally, not logically. By the law of association, one event recalls another. Remember another point. The novelist deliberately makes the paths of some of the characters cross and recross. They don't know each other and remain strangers throughout the novel. Yet, they are bound to each other by a common humanity. They see the same sights and react to it in their own way. The same airplane is seen by Clarissa and by Septimus and Razia, and a few others like Mrs. Coates, Mrs. Bletchley, evoking varying feelings and emotions. Similarly, the royal car is seen by many. Septimus' death is reported at Clarissa's party and shocking her a great deal. The coincidence may be startling, but this is life. And we have already hinted at the deeper connection between Clarissa and Septimus, the latter acting as Clarissa's double. Another important characteristic of this novel, apart from stream of consciousness, is the manipulation of time. One of the important features of the novel is the skillful manipulation of time. First, we have to take into account the mechanical or clock time, the passing of minutes and hours measured by the striking of the clock. Second, there is the psychological time or inner time, which may be a voyage from youth to age, from the present to the past and to the future. Thirdly, there is the historic time or time in relation to nationwide and worldwide events. For example, there are direct references to the war, which is just over. Also, there are indirect references to the British Empire. The dark time tells us about the passing of time, and this is indicated by the chiming of Big Ben, the great bell in the clock tower of the British Houses of Parliament. The frequent chiming of the clocks marks the progress of the day. Read the novel carefully, and you will find that it is early morning when Clarissa comes out of her house to purchase flowers. 11 o'clock when Peter comes in to meet Clarissa. 11:30 when Peter is in Trafalgar Square. A quarter to 12 when, in response to Rhezia's query, Septimus very slowly, very drowsily, smiles mysteriously at the dead man in the grey suit. 12 o'clock when Septimus and Rhezia enter Sir William Bradshaw's house and Clarissa lays her green dress on the bed. 1:30 when Hugh Whitebread and Richard Dalloway meet for luncheon at Lady Bruton's in Brook Street. 3 o'clock when Richard comes home with his flowers. 3:30 while Clarissa is thinking about Elizabeth and Kilman and then watches an old lady move away from the window. 6 when Septimus kills himself. The clock went on striking 4, 5, 6. The Peter thinks of the triumphs of civilization. The march of time cannot be stopped. Most of the characters on different occasions are conscious of its importance and regulate their lives accordingly. It brings proportion, order, discipline in their lives, but unknown to them. Time also performs the act of uniting, binding different characters, different situation it is for. Coming to psychological time, let us quote David Dages. And I quote, the added dimension afforded by allowing the persons of the novel to move back and forth in time to encompass an entire life and a few days of thought enriches not only the personality of the characters, but in a great measure, the psychological depth of the book. Quote ends. The psychological time involves the backward and forward movements of the stream of consciousness of the various characters. I think with this manipulation of time, we must go to characterization. Well, there are a lot of plenty of important features in this novel. But what I would do is actually split this lesson to be discussed, especially characters, characterization, and other important things to discuss in our next class. So, students, we talked about the different aspects of modernist novels, different key characteristics of modernist novel, and the general background of 20th century English novel. After that, we took up Mrs. Dalloway, a novel written by Virginia Woolf. In doing so, we also had a brief description of the life of Mrs. Life of Virginia Woolf, right from her childhood, to her schooling, to her family, and her interest in reading and writing, and her notable works. Okay, and we also looked at general introduction of. We also discussed a general introduction of the novel, Mrs. Dalloway. We had a plot summary in the beginning, and we went on to explore Mrs. Dalloway as a modernist novel. In doing so, we were able to take up stream of consciousness and analyze how this new technique, uh, notable in the works of modernist writer, is used by Virginia Woolf in Mrs. Dalloway. After that, we also started our discussion on manipulation of time. I think there are other, equally important aspects of novel that needs to be, discussed at length. So that is why I think, we have to continue our discussion on Mrs. Dalloway in the next class uh, to complete, remaining important aspects. So let's sum up. We have, understood that Virginia Woolf is a different and difficult novelist. Going through any of her major novels, we are bound to get puzzled. Their characters and events are often unclear. For simple reason that she follows an entirely different method in writing her novels, using a new technique called stream of consciousness, which is a complete, breakaway from traditional techniques of used in writing novels. She completely rejected the conventional conceptions of the novel, where we find straightforward narration with emphasis on incident and external description. The stream of consciousness was not a new technique. Earlier, novelists like Dorothy Richardson had used it in her novels. So had James Joyce, a great exponent of this method, than either. But first, let us be clear, what precisely do we mean by this stream of consciousness technique? We knew that uh, using this technique, a novelist attempts to convey all the contents of a character's mind, memory, sense perceptions, feelings, intuitions, thoughts in relation to the stream of experience as it passes by, often at random. Well, we will also have occasion to say more about this technique uh, when we go deeper into the discussion on use of stream of consciousness. What I tried to present is an high level, understanding of stream of consciousness and a few examples of use of these techniques vis-a-vis Mrs. Dalloway. Uh, we know that in Mrs. Dalloway too, we find that narrator delves deep into the minds of a few people and skillfully portrays their characters, and in the process manages to tell a story of tale which undoubtedly is quite different from a tale in a traditional novel. So, students, we will be back with a discussion on Mrs. Dalloway in our next counseling session. So, I urge you to join us in the next class, and I thank Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University for organizing this virtual counseling session or online counseling session for the benefit of the students. So take care of yourself. See you tomorrow in the next counseling session. Thank you. Bye bye.